Andy, thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for joining us. Uh, so many things to talk to you about. I'm fascinated by your background,
Mhm.
and we'll get into that in a minute, but probably have a lot of New Yorkers here in the audience. And I was saying to you, we were on the radio just a few minutes ago, and I said, I bet there aren't a huge number of people who stop you and say, I love the subway. It's going great.
No, that's I occasionally dream about that, Jason, but one day maybe, one day. One thing I've found humbling here actually is whenever you go to a new city, and I started my career 29 years ago, nearly 30 years ago now, in London, and then moved to Sydney in Australia, then to Toronto, now here. And each time you wonder what the reaction will be. You wonder, well, how will the natives respond to some British guy turning up, having a go at running their transit. And the New Yorkers have been fantastic. There's this myth that people aren't friendly. They're direct, but I've had a very warm welcome, and I don't intend to let people down.
And so, what are they directly saying is the biggest problem, and what are you directly saying back to them?
The biggest problem is it's just reliability of the service. That's what people want. That's the clamour, and obviously that is the big challenge here. The fact that there's been decades of underinvestment in transit, and the fact that the service has progressively, relentlessly declined in many ways. Albeit, I always caveat that by reminding people that we do move 8 million people a day, and most people, most days, aren't delayed. But there has been this slow decline in the reliability of the service. So that's what needs to be done. But I think we can harvest that, we can mine that, we can use that frustration to build a compelling case for what needs to be done, which I said on day one isn't tinkering, it's an all-out modernization of transit.
So your day one was not that long ago in terms of this New York City job. 10 months,
Yep.
10 months ago.
17th of January.
17th January. You is your first day on the job. You obviously knew what you were getting into to some extent. And let's be clear, this isn't even the oldest system you've worked on. You worked on the tube, which
Sure.
is
The oldest.
even older.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your biggest surprise?
I think I guess the biggest has been just the scale of the task. I mean, I had a big job in Toronto. Toronto is the TTC's, the third largest transit in North America, and itself had myriad problems that needed to be fixed, and has 7 bus depots. We have 27 bus depots. The TTC has 14,000 employees. New York City Transit has 50,000 employees. TTC carries around 2 million people a day. We carry 8 million people a day. So I think it's the scale of the job and the scale of the challenge. We are dealing with, in some cases, equipment, signal frames that are safe, but nearly 100 years old. That's ridiculous.
And you mentioned to me earlier that so old that the manufacturer doesn't make it anymore,
That's
may
right.
not even exist.
We make our own parts. So again, for
But
New
that's
Yorkers
got to
here,
be this
I
moment where
stress
you
it's
say,
safe.
"Are you kidding
Well,
me?"
no.
Right?
What it says to me is we must prevail in this conversation that we started pretty much on day one,
Yeah.
to say if we want to rebuild this thing, if we want to give New Yorkers the transit system they deserve, we need a plan. Well, careful what you wish for. We now have a plan. It was put together within 100 days of my arrival. It's called the Fast Forward Plan. It overtly says that we don't need tinkering. We've got to modernize transit from top to bottom, every aspect of it. Renew the signaling system, rebuild the stations, rebuild the track and the other critical infrastructure, get the buses moving again, make the system fully accessible. It comes at a cost, but it can be done.
And what is that cost?
Well, it is billions of dollars. I mean, I've said publicly, just broadly, we're looking at around $40 billion over 10 years. And we may well be able to pare that back if we, as we progressively granulize the actual cost. And people will balk at that. But I would say two key points. Number one, if you divide that 40 billion by 10 years, now we're talking 4 billion a year. So if you divide that then further between the state, the city, and the feds, and look at the state pulls in something like $168 billion. So it's to get state-of-the-art transit in 10 years, or as I like to put it, less than 4,000 days. Are we sure we don't want to pay $4 billion? That is a price worth paying. And the second key point that I would make is there's the cost of not doing it. And the cost of not doing this is the infrastructure will get even older. The pressure on it will grow even more intense because the population of New York is growing, and the need won't go away, and the cost will only get higher. So let's bite the bullet and get on with it. And within 10 years, less than 4,000 days, we can have a system worthy of this great city.
Sounds great, and I'm sure everybody in this room is like, yeah, let's do it.
Can be done.
I have a feeling that there are some politicians who are like, I don't know, that feels like a lot of money.
It
and
is.
maybe that guy can pay for it. I can pay a little. I don't have any money. Like, what's the reaction?
We need to make the case. So we need to make the case, and I've been doing a series of town halls around the boroughs to make that case. And you know, at the end of the day, you don't get that kind of money with a begging pole. You don't just say, "No, please, please, give us some money." You've got to be more sophisticated than that. So we're undertaking a comprehensive, third-party, independent economic impact analysis to show not only the economic benefit to New York and New York State, and I would argue the US actually, of a modern transit system once it's finished, but also the positive economic impact across the whole of New York State and beyond while we undertake the work. And I think it would take a brave politician anyway to say no when there's this overwhelming clamor from New Yorkers that things have to improve.
And where do you anticipate, because I know you haven't fully presented it yet, but given those constituencies, sort of local, state, Fed, where do you anticipate you'll get the most pushback?
I think the main issue will be the biggest challenge we're facing at the moment is credibility, because for various reasons, some very true, very accurate, some not so true. The MTA does not have the confidence of some stakeholders. People say the MTA wastes money, that it's not accountable, it's not transparent, and how can we trust the MTA? How can we trust you with that kind of money? How can we trust you to deliver on time, on budget? And to be fair, some of that is warranted. So we're doing something about it under the former chair, Joe Lota, who's just left us.
Yep.
He set up a series of task forces to completely modernize the way we go about procuring business, the way we go about executing projects, the way we, the transparency of the organization and the way we account for public money. So I think we do need to overcome that skepticism. I think one of the benefits I have as a newbie is, and a pitch I can make is, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You can't say to me, well, until you prove that you're worthy of having this investment, we're not going to give it to you. Well, hang on a minute, until you give me the investment, I can't really show what's possible. So you've got to give me a chance. So in many ways, job one right now, and we're all over it, is to make the existing system work better. So we're having an all-out push on what I call operational basics, an all-out push on operational disciplines to get the existing bus service through crowded streets and to get the existing subway system working more reliably even before we get the investment.
So let's talk about a little, if we can, about the future of transportation. I mean, this city is under several administrations, one of which we're intimately familiar with here in this building. There has been, a lot of thought given to the way people just move around this city, whether it's City Bike or, the public transit, cars, Uber, all of that. Where are we going? Look around the corner for us. This is about the year ahead. What happens in 19? Because it does feel like, pun intended, a lot of this is accelerating.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing on my to-do list is to make that compelling case for the investment that I've just talked about.
Yeah.
Because the seminal vote, if you like, comes in the spring when in Albany the state legislature will have to decide, does it want to put this money in or not. Next key milestone will be the city budget process, which happens in the summer. So that will be very much top of my agenda to make that case, to win that argument. But in the meantime, I can see, we've got to gear up for the upcoming closure of the L line tunnel under the East River. That's a huge logistical challenge. That's coming up in 19.
Grumpy hipsters.
Pardon?
Right. Grumpy hipsters.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that they still get their lattes and still get to work on time. But and things like, you alluded to it, things like Lyft, Uber, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And so what I want to do is I see them as complementary to the transit service, but we've got to get people back riding the buses. So a lot of my job, a lot of the noise so far in my job has been about the subway, and rightly so. Buses and paratrans, but they're equally important to New Yorkers. And buses, you look at swathes of Queens, for example, that is the primary means of transit.
Yeah.
And we've got to get our buses.
Yeah.
We must give the buses a fighting chance of getting through the traffic. People will often say, you know, my bus is always late. Well, it can't levitate. It's stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
You know, it's hopelessly mired in traffic. Our buses...
So levitating buses. You just solved your own problem.
There you go. Well, I'm sure Mr. Bloomberg could give me some money to come up with that. But, you know, at the end of the day, we do have bus lanes. They're hopelessly clogged with people parking, with deliveries going on, double parking, illegal parking, people with permits. We've got to work with NYPD to clear those bus lanes. I want to see more bus lanes. I want to see more select bus service, which is the express bus service, and more technology to give buses priority such that people come back to buses, and so that we thereby we provide a more or greener alternative, if you like, for the city.
And one thing I wanted to make sure that I understood and the audience understands is from a fare increase perspective and those sorts of things, that ultimately doesn't rest with you?
No, that's a board decision.
Right.
Although, you know, I'm attending the board, the fares hearings. I was at one last night in Manhattan, actually.
Right.
We had 64 speakers. You know, we're out there listening to the public.
64 speakers?
64 speakers last night. So we sat and listened. I made notes of everyone's contribution. So, look, at the end of the day, no one likes fare rises.
The 58th, like what the previous guy said?
There's always going to be some repetition, but there was actually some pretty good ideas, and that's the whole point of the fares hearings. We're out there. We've pitched a couple of examples or options, if you like. We've said that this is what needs to happen. The bottom line is the one thing that is an absolute fact. The MTA needs new sources of revenue. We've got to find sustainable, affordable, predictable, enduring sources of revenue. So a fare rise will never be popular. We're out there listening to the public now to hear what their views are as to how that should be implemented.
I wanted to ask you about one thing that's been in the news that obviously affects the way people think about moving around or potentially moving around the city, and specifically Queens, actually, which is Amazon HQ2, or half of Amazon HQ2. I would imagine you were involved to some extent in that process, in the bid, as it were. A, what was that like? And B, is that something that New Yorkers should worry about? Like, oh, great, 25,000 more employees. That's what we need, like, plop down in the middle of the 5 boroughs.
So I'd say peripherally involved. I was asked to go to speak to the bid team. The bid team were working their way around these different US cities, and they asked to speak to someone about the transit offer in Long Island City, which was obviously the place they were considering, which they've now settled on. So I briefed them on the existing transit offer in Long Island City, which is actually pretty good, because you've got in and around the area 8 subway lines, numerous bus services, you've got a ferry across the river, and you've got the Long Island Railroad. So it's actually not a bad transit offer today. But I also briefed them on what's coming up. We've just completed the resignaling of the 7 line, the Flushing line, albeit we've still got some tweaks to iron out. And we've also got plans for rolling out CBTC, communications-based train control on the remainder of the lines. So there's lots going to happen. I enjoyed it. You know, they listened to what I had to say. They asked me various questions. They're obviously not fazed by transit. That's why they chose to come to New York. Which is, I think it's good news. In terms of your point about the impact on the service, well, first up, I don't think we should assume that necessarily all 25,000 people will be suddenly crammed onto the 7 line.
Right.
First up, so I suspect, given the demographic of people that typically work for Amazon, some will choose to live in and around the facility. Some may cycle to work. Some may walk to work. But also there will be a certain amount, I predict, of people going contra peak. In other words, coming into Long Island City
from
Manhattan rather than the prevailing direction of traffic, which is typically into Manhattan in the morning peak and the reverse in the evening.
All right. Well, before we let you go and adjourn to cocktails, tell us, if we want to look at the future of especially subway travel here, is there either a place we can go in New York that would be very convenient, or is there a place somewhere else that you've worked, or some place else that you've seen that sort of captures what's possible?
So I'll give you a couple of examples then. I'm a big fan of the MTR, which is the Mass Transit Railway in Hong Kong. I mean, that's a superb system. It has huge advantages in that it was built in 1976. So that shows what you could do if you started again from scratch. I mean, there's even more modern examples like Shanghai. It's just amazing what they've done there. But again, it's brand new. Dead straight platforms, very spacious, fully accessible, air conditioned. So that would be, that ideally where you'd like
You
to
just
go.
had everyone in this room dreaming about
There
what
you
that
go.
would feel like in New York City.
But a couple of points then. So a couple of points. One, and I appreciate I'm dealing with a sophisticated audience, so a lot of people here have been to other places in the world. But I think unless you've been to other places in the world, you may have this view, oh, the New York subway sucks, it's absolutely terrible. I don't agree with that. The fact we have such an extensive subway system, the fact that we have express lines, which is not the norm in most cities, the fact that we have so much redundancy that you have so many crossovers and turn-back locations where you can get around trouble is fantastic. So the good news is the skeleton of the New York subway is superb. It needs to be modernized. So here's my second example. The second example, Jason, is London. Because only 20 years ago, 25 years ago, London was in a similar state. Squalid stations, well, squalid is probably too strong a word, but certainly shabby stations, unreliable signalling, and increasingly unreliable service. Huge investment and a plan has put together a fundamentally different transit proposition in London. And they did that through sustained funding, lockbox funding, and a plan that then delivered. So that's what we've got. We've now got the plan. We need the money.
You seem like a pretty optimistic guy.
You need two things in this job, Jason. You need relentless optimism and a very thick skin.
There you go. We're going to leave it there. Andy, thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to have Andy sit here for 30 more seconds while I sort of close out the show. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun for sure. And on behalf of Carol Masser, the other moderators, and the team behind this, and everyone here at Bloomberg, thank you. I also want to thank our sponsors, BSI, Invesco, QQQ, The Unicorn, Wheels Up, and Hennessy Paradis Imperial. The Hennessy folks actually have a very nice surprise for you waiting just as you leave, so please enjoy that. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks. It was a lot of fun.